Have you ever left the country before? If you did, where did you go? What was your experience? Before you went, were you scared? Were you excited? Were you confident? For me, it was all those things. When I was 16, I left the country for the very first time. And it was a trip that I took without my parents. I went with a group of people, though, so I wasn't by myself. And I experienced a whole gamut of emotions. Excitement, a little bit of a lot of curiosity, a little bit of fear, a little bit of what am I gonna expect, and so much excitement. So let's dive into all of that, starting with the location. So first time I left the country was to go to Costa Rica. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but the country is so rich and welcoming. And I fell in love with it. But let's back up a little bit. From a young age, I grew up listening to my mom talk about traveling as a child with her family, her dad just waking them up on a weekend for a road trip saying, pack your bags, we're going to be gone for a couple days. See you in the car in 15 or whatever it might be. And they just take off. And my parents kind of had this same mentality growing up. And so with that, I grew up with a fascination for traveling. And of course, when my mom was a teenager, she did a lot of traveling abroad. She specifically took a backpacking trip through Europe. And as she would share stories about that, I would say to myself, I want to do that. Like, that's something that I would love to do. I want to go backpack Europe. And while I have yet to backpack Europe, I feel like I've backpacked a lot of the world. So, when I was 16, and I was presented with this opportunity to go to Costa Rica with my church on a mission trip, my first response was, yes. Like, I have always wanted to go somewhere. I've always wanted to travel. I didn't know the first thing about lining it up, but now I have the opportunity. And I don't have the money to go. So I remember sitting down with my parents, my youth pastor, a couple other people at church, and just expressing that I have this burning desire to go. And I don't know why. I can't really explain why this trip, but my heart is just telling me that I gotta go. And they said, well, then it sounds like you're meant to go. And if money's the only thing holding you back, then don't worry about it. That will be taken care of. And I thought, how? I don't have the funds to support myself going. It was hundreds of dollars. I think it was like $1,200. And I made $7.50 an hour. And I won't get into that. They were like, let's help. They helped me raise the support, and I was able to go. And I remember being full of joy, excitement, curiosity as our plane touched down in San Jose, Costa Rica. And I was riding with two friends who were bilingual. One's David's parent, or I think his mom was a Spanish teacher, and then Caitlin, her dad, and her brother Garrett were all on this trip. Her dad was the pastor. They all came from being missionaries in Mexico, so they were all bilingual. So I thought, well, I'm in good hands. I've got my two travel mates are bilingual, but I also want to learn Spanish. And so I'm studying up on everything that I can on the airplane. If anything is into, like, if it's got the translation, I'm working on it. And then as soon as we're exiting the plane, I'm going, David, what does that sign say? Because nothing was in English, nothing. And so I remember going, how do you pronounce that? And he goes, it's reclamo de equipaje. I was like, what? And he said, reclamo de equipaje. It means baggage claim. was like, oh, cool. So that was the very first phrase that I ever learned in Spanish was reclamo de equipaje. And then, of course, we're walking down the tarmac. We're walking to the baggage claim, and I'm asking about everything. What does that say? What does that say? And he's translating, and he was being very patient with me, which, looking back, I'm very appreciative of. But I'm so full of excitement as we're walking out of the airport, and the humidity hits me, the hot air hits me, and of course, I'm from South Carolina, so I'm used to hot, I'm used to humid, but this was a whole different level. We were like right there on the equator, so I thought I was gonna be able to handle it. I thought I'd be cool with it, and of course, walking out of the airport, I was still in this shading, but man, it hit me. I was like, ooh, this is different. Well, so after we pile into the van and we're driving through San Jose, we've got to head about 2 hours, I guess, southeast of San Jose for our final destination. We're headed out to build a church, or at least get the bones of the church built for this little town. And about 2 hours away. So we had a beautiful car ride through the mountain range. And when I say beautiful, like, we are way up in the sky compared to the mountains here in South Carolina, which aren't really mountains in contrast. But we're way up, like, cloud level. The trees are so green and full and beautiful. I remember there were leaves like this big. We stopped on the side of the road just to take pictures. And if I can find those pictures, I'll put them in this video. But I mean, we're holding them up, like hiding behind them, having fun with it, being funny. And when we finally got to our destination, we checked in this little motel on the side of the dirt road, and we had, I think we had 3 rooms for the whole group, so we're all bunking up together. And this was so funny. Right off the bat, we get checked in, and the floors are tile. There's like bars on the window, and we walk in, and I'm like, oh, AC. This is nice. Yeah. I am so, this is going to be cool. I don't have to hang out in this humidity the whole time. And so it was me, Luis, David, I think Garrett. We're all in a room. And this was back before our phones were also iPods. This was back when I carried an iPod, what was it? iPod mini. Oh, I wish I had that right here for you, but it held 1,000 songs. And so I had a flip phone and iPod mini, and like the original iPod mini. It was a silver one. And David had an iPod, and instead of sharing songs back and forth, we just swapped iPods. And I remember that on day one. I was like, okay, so new place, new tunes, like, let's all get to know each other a little bit more. Because actually, I'd only met him like in the prep, like when I found out that he was going to be on the trip. I didn't really know him before that. So we swapped iPods, and I know some of you don't know what I'm talking about, but that stood out to me on the trip because he introduced me to a lot of new songs that now when I hear them, they take me right back to my time in Costa Rica. But what was really funny is after we got all checked in, Todd, our youth pastor, he comes walking and he's like, hey, you guys have AC? I'm like, yeah, why? He goes, our room doesn't. And then somebody else from another room, they were like, well, you have AC? And so apparently out of the 3 rooms, or out of the entire motel, all the AC units were out except for our one room. So I got lucky in that respect. But as soon as we all got settled in, we went down to the common area, which was just open. Basically, think picnic area with a fence around it. They had the roof and then fencing to keep people out, but otherwise just giant picnic tables in the middle. And that's where we ate all of our meals, unless we were down on the job. So, excuse me. I just remember thinking the food here is so rich and so filling. and so delicious. But I experienced some culture shock the next morning around breakfast, when I was used to having a bowl of cold cereal, which would sit light. And of course, I'm sitting in the AC normally. But the next morning at 7 in the morning, the sun is already up and I am already dripping sweat in a tank top and shorts, hanging out in the shade, still dripping sweat. That's how hot and humid it was there. And the breakfast was beans, rice, and eggs and some plantain. And I thought, this is way too heavy. And I started eating it, and that mixed with the heat did not sit well with me. And I didn't even eat, I think, half of my meal. I was like, okay. but they had these really delicious fruit drinks that brought me back to life. And of course, we go down to the job site very first day, and I am so excited to be working hard, being out in the culture, and just experience whatever there is to experience. And I'm used to the heat, I'm used to the humidity, so I don't need any sunscreen. That's for all you wussies, you wussy white people. Well, I was, about 20 minutes later, I was a red person. I was very red. My arms, my neck, my nose. I learned a good lesson, and that is when someone tells you to put sunscreen on that lives there, you should probably listen. So I was rubbing a lot of aloe lotion on me, and then they actually also went out and got me a cowboy hat to cover a good portion of my neck and nose and everything. So I was walking around with the zinc on my nose and my neck and the cowboy hat for the rest of the time, looking funny. But that wasn't the craziest part. I found out that if you get an ant bite there, first off, the ants are quite a bit bigger. I'm exaggerating. They're like that tall. But shoot, I had one bite my ankle, and I'd been bitten by a fire ant. That thing swelled up. It looked like someone stuck a nickel under my skin, and it hurt so bad. So, lesson learned. I'm like, okay, a little bit of culture shock here. We got big bugs to worry about. The food is more filling, super hot, and the sun is a lot more intense on the equator. But okay, so that's all the culture shock part. The rest of it was just pure bliss. Right behind the job site that we were on, I'm not going to bore you with the details of putting up walls and rafters. That wasn't the highlight of my trip. The highlights of my trip were hanging out in the river behind that job site at the end of the day. We had worked full 10 hours and we're exhausted, and shirt is just completely drenched in sweat and dirt. But just, you know what? Who cares? And we go over and we jump in this river. The river, fresh water, absolutely pristine, and it's kind of in a jungle atmosphere. So to paint the picture, there's this village along one side of the river, and then if we go up towards like the top of where the last house is, there's actually a train track that runs through, and there was an old abandoned train bridge that went across the river. And then if you looped around, there was nothing over there. It was just jungle. But we were able to go up to this high rock and jump about 15 to 20 feet down into where the river was pooling together. So it was really deep, and you could jump in. But when you jumped in, it would swirl you around underwater and then kick you out downstream, and you'd pop up a good 30 yards downstream. So then you swim as fast as you can, because you're getting pulled away about that fast. I mean, it was a rushing current. But you're getting pulled away. You swim towards the edge, and you get out and you crawl over the rocks, and you go back up and you do it again. And the locals were having so much fun watching us do this and guiding us through this experience. And I remember one of the guys who we were working alongside at the site, he took us out and he's like, watch this. he jumps in, and we're just watching. We're like, where is he? And we're like, okay, if we're tracking him, he went down. He should be down. He's got to be way down the river by now. Like, is he okay? Did he... And right when we start to panic, he pops up right there. And we're like, how did you do that? And he goes, magic. I went all the way down and I came back up. It was magic. And I was like, let me try. So I jumped in and I dove down and I grabbed onto a big rock on the bottom and just held my breath. Water's rushing over me. I held my breath as long as I could. And then I shot up in the same spot. And I go, I'm a magician too. But it sincerely puzzled me at first. And he's like, oh, you got it. You just hold on to the bottom and it won't take you anywhere. But that was a cool experience, just having the power of the river rush over my shoulders and try to sweep me away. That was a really cool experience. And it's one that will likely forever stick with me. Another one was at the end of so we were there for 8 days. We worked for 6 of them. And the last 2 were spent exploring the country. So we'd go and we'd work 10-hour days. We'd be exhausted, go cool off in the river, go back, go to bed. But the last 2 days we did 3 things. We went on a tour of a banana plantation, which I thought was super cool. Got to see how bananas grow, what they look like as they're growing, and then also how they're harvested. And I thought that was so cool. We were just walking the paths, but up above us were these cable lines. And they would put a pulley on the cable, and then it had a chair that a guy would sit on, and he had a machete, rubber boots, t-shirt, shorts, and about a 15-foot long pole, like a bamboo pole. And he would just push himself along the line, and they'd go out into the field. And then just like a train system, they could angle off and go this way or that way, but they would roll up next to these banana trees, and they'd be up at the same height as these big clusters of bananas, and they'd grab on, they'd put a hook around it, take their machete, chop it off, tie it onto their seat, and they'd wheel back into the house with these big clusters of bananas dangling below them. And we were all underneath all of that. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. And I didn't see any spiders or snakes, but I saw what I believe was a Jesus lizard. And I say what I believe because I don't actually know. There was no way of looking it up. But this little guy was about the same size. And when we scared him, he got up on 2 legs. And if you don't know what a Jesus lizard is, they call it a Jesus lizard because they run so fast on their back 2 legs that they can actually skip across water. And this guy got up on 2 legs and he took off like the Roadrunner. I was like, no way, that's so cool. So got to see some really cool wildlife. Got to see how bananas are harvested. And that all happened in one day. And then the next day, on our way back into San Jose, to fly home, we took a tour through the canopies, or it's called a canopy tour, where we actually rode zip lines just like those guys, except even further up. So we started on this platform at the top of a mountain, took this tractor ride up to the top, got on the platform, harnessed in. We got this 5-point harness, helmet, everything, big gloves, and we zipped through the treetops, like about 100 feet up in the air. Zipped through the treetops, one tree to the next, and did this whole tour through the trees. And I got to see live monkeys, like swinging in the trees. I thought that was super cool. The only time I had ever seen that before was at the zoo. And so I got to see live monkeys. I got to experience and just hanging out with cool birds and stuff in the trees. But the coolest part was the very last zip line. It was 1,000 feet long. and it went over the same river that we had been playing in, only several miles higher. And we started out like mountaintop, and it was 1,000 feet long. We were probably 300 feet up in the air at some points. And so that was exhilarating, going super fast, flying over the trees, over the valley, and then over the river. And that was exhilarating, and I'd never done anything like it. And then my anticipation was actually building from that point forward, because while that was a lot of fun, I knew more was to come. And I had gone whitewater rafting before, and I'm an avid fan of whitewater rafting, and I knew that up next we were getting ready to go whitewater rafting on the same river that we'd been playing in. And of course, all week I had seen rafts come through, so I was building anticipation. I was watching them, but nothing could prepare me for what it actually was like. When people ask me, what's been your favorite rafting experience? If you've gone North Carolina, Tennessee, all these places, like, by far, hands down, Costa Rica. I don't remember the name of the river, but Costa Rica, because there were no rules. There were no insurance guidelines to follow. There were no cares other than a lot of puravida, as our rafting guide would say all throughout the trip. He was a trip himself. He was a fun rafting guide, and he's the one who made the trip what it was, because it was full of class 3s, 4s, and 5s, like sincere class 4s and 5s. And it was about a 4-hour long trip down the river, and this guy was a hoot. If he didn't know an English word, he would ask us, "Cómo se dice?" And like, how do you say this? And man, we would just have so much fun with him. So much so that he revealed halfway down the river that he had packed some super soakers. So it was the kind where you dip them in the water and you syringe the water, and then you basically push it out, and as hard as you get it. We attacked the other rafts and started a water fight. But man, this guy was such a good guide that he knew right where the eddies were, right where all the nooks and crannies in the river were. So much so that he knew exactly where the photographer was going to be. And he had us, we had no idea what was going on, but he said, "All right, everybody, turn your paddles around. I know you're not supposed to let go of your T-grip, but let go of your T-grip. I don't care. Let's go. Everybody pretend you've all played air guitar. Everybody, let's play air guitar." So he has us all playing air guitar with our T's facing in. He goes, "All right, cool. Now what we're going to do, you're all familiar with we will rock you." So he had us going, and, and he'd have us hit the paddle on the side of the raft and then slam our T into the T of the guy sitting across from us. So we're all sitting there, and those that knew the song were singing it. Of course, we all knew the chorus, but not everybody knew all the lyrics. But what we didn't know is that we went through these rapids, and we're just thinking we're going carefree, having fun in the rapids. But there's this eddy that he hit perfectly, and he was standing up in the back of the raft and jumped and did a 360 in the air and then landed. And the cameraman caught it perfect, because we're all like having fun. And then our rafting guide is completely airborne in the back of the boat with his back turned towards the cameraman, just floating in the air. And the photographer snapped the photo perfectly. So of course we get to the end of our experience. We're looking through photos, and I'm like, "Oh, I need that photo. That is that's a priceless photo." So I'll have to dig it up and post it. I have it somewhere, but it's printed. I don't have a digital copy. I have a whole album of photos from this trip. And just a segue. David had a camera and Todd had a camera. And between the two of them, I was always asking to borrow one to take photos. And I pretty much always had one of their cameras in my hand, snapping photos. And to wrap this story up, I walked away from Costa Rica begrudgingly. I did not want to leave. I felt so full of life and joy and excitement and passion. I didn't want to leave. And I understood why they say, you Americans have all the clocks. We have all the time. And it's because they just lived very present. They lived in the moment, and they didn't worry about tomorrow. And while Americans are very concerned about tomorrow and chasing the next dollar, they weren't. And I enjoyed that. I felt it was a more pure way of living. And that stuck with me. So much so that I didn't want to come home to the rat race that I was already in at the age of 16, working, pay for things, and go to school, get the grades, do all the things that society expects me to do. And I remember hanging out in the airport, feeling like I didn't want to leave. I just had this awesome 8 days in another country. It was even more than I could have ever imagined it to be. And I've left so many rich stories out just for the sake of time. And I did not want to come home. Like, the first time I've ever experienced what I thought was depression was coming back to the States. I did not want to come. Did not want to leave. If they had said, you can stay here and just figure it out by yourself from this point forward, we'll tell your parents that you'll write them, I would have stayed. And I knew that wouldn't go over well, so I came home. And I didn't know what I would do if I did stay, so I came home. And just to distract myself, I borrowed Todd's camera. And so we're sitting there in the airport, and I'm like, okay, let's have a contest. Mr. Competition and me, let's have a contest. David, who can take the best photos? Todd's like, oh, I want in on this. So we were passing cameras around. You had to use both cameras. You had to, who could get the best shot? So we'd walk up to a situation, who can get the most creative shot here? Or who can get a cool shot of people? And so a lot of my photos from the trip happened at the airport before we left. And of course, I got I don't remember if it was film or digital, but I got the photos, and those are in my album, and I need to go dig that up. But I left Costa Rica thinking, this won't be the last time I travel, and I want to take my camera and explore more of the world. So now you've heard how I got into photography. You've heard how I became so passionate about traveling. And now, the next video, I want to talk about people. And this is where a lot of the heart and soul of my story comes in, because I have so many stories of people who have impacted me and people who I have in turn impacted. And I can't wait to share those stories with you. But in order to do that, I need you to, 1, like this video, 2, share it with friends and family, and 3, hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of future videos. I plan on putting one out every Friday, and maybe some more sprinkled in here and there. But anyways, at least for now, every Friday. So thank you for joining me today. I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and I look forward to the next video.